I am terrible at remembering people's names. If it was up to me, we would all wear name tags everywhere we went. Hello, my name is Zach, and this is a One Take Tuesday where I share a thought, a story, or an idea. From beginning to end, one take, no cuts, no edits. What you see is what you get. It's true, I am really bad at remembering people's names, which that's not good in general, but especially being in the ministry, I always feel bad about that, and I always struggle with that. And I've tried different tips and tricks and things like that, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I can meet somebody and they can say, hey, my name's John, and in my head I'm thinking John, and when they walk away I think, what was their name again? Other people, I can hear their name and it just sticks. But if I can see it and hear it, then that tends to help me a lot. But it's important for that because there is something about our names. And, Jesus spoke people's names, and he spoke love and life into them. And I believe that's important for us too as Christians to do that, to know people's names and to encourage them through that. So I want to share two quick stories with you today about the importance of a name. And the first one was when I was in seminary, and one of my professors, Dr. Johnny Derwin, he was so good with names. And I met him in passing one time, and the next time I saw him, he called me by name. And that may not seem like a big deal, but I was just kind of blown away by that. And this was before I ever even had him in class. But he remembered my name and he spoke my name. And to me, that just told me that he really cared about me as a person. And then later when I was in his class, he would remember details about my life or about ministry, something that I had shared or a question that I had asked or something like that. And it just really communicated that he cared about me and cared about what God was doing in my life. And so again, I struggle with that, but we as Christians should speak life into people, and we should try to remember things about people, and not just idle chit chat, but to be able to know what's going on in people's lives. And sometimes that's harder than others, and sometimes people aren't forthcoming with that information. But when we can, remember people's names and call them by name and speak truth into them, and that's one way to show the love of Christ to other people. The second story was the second church that I was ever on staff at was actually the church that I grew up in. And when I was the youth minister there when I was in seminary, and every Sunday morning I would walk into the chapel and through the side door, and there'd be two or three senior adult ladies that were always sitting there. They'd get there early and kind of visit and hang out. And when I walked in, they would always, hey, Zach, and I'd go hug them and just kind of talk. And, they'd ask me how my wife was doing and how things were going and things like that. And then after a minute or two, I'd be on my way and go do whatever I had to do to get ready for the service. And one day, probably after about 6 months of this, one Sunday, I walked into the chapel and I'm hugging them and talking to them. And I hug this one lady, and then I go to let go, and she lets go just a little bit, but then she stops me, and our faces are about this far apart. And she just kind of looks at me and she said, do you know my name? And I didn't. I didn't know her name. I speak to her every week. And I said, no, ma'am, I don't. She said, I didn't think so. We've never been properly introduced. My name is Ruth. And now we've been introduced and we know each other. And in that moment, I was humbled. I was embarrassed, but not by her, but just by me. And she said, we've just never been introduced. I know you because you are on staff and you're on stage sometimes and things like that. But she said, we just didn't really know each other, and now we do. And she said, in my life, I have learned that it's just better to ask. And if you don't know somebody's name, don't just go on and go 6 months without knowing it. She said, just say, I don't know if I know you. And that was a huge life lesson to me. And I do that all the time. I have to do it just because I'm bad with names. But sometimes I'll be talking to somebody and I know I should know their name, or I know I've met them before, and I'll just have to say, hey, I'm sorry, but remind me your name again, or excuse me, I'm really bad with names. What was your name again? And most times people will say, hey, me too. What was your name? And we have to kind of do that together. But that's one way that helps me to remember people's names. And so I just want to encourage you. Maybe you're great with names. Maybe you're not so good with names. But names are important to us. And when we can speak people's names and speak encouragement and speak life into them, I believe that's sharing the love of Christ through just knowing somebody's name and knowing something about them. So when you have those opportunities, speak life. And if you don't know somebody's name, don't be afraid to ask, because like I said, most of the time they may not remember your name either. But it's better to ask and then remember it than to go on over and over and over and not know their name. So I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that that's encouraging, but speak life through people's names. Till next time, walk humbly.